Welcome to Epilogue, where I tell you folktales and legends, then fabricate my own counterpart from those root yarns. I am that heirloom passed to you from generations back, bringing fortune or ruin to your family name. But you can call me Izzie Cava. Most people look back on their first love bittersweetly, for the innocence of youth leads most to an awkward stepping stone that is soon forgot. But nonetheless, it is a love that is carried with us, always, a candle flame where bonfires will roar. Poor 16-year-old Nancy Barton of Jefferson, New Hampshire, is one such young lover whose tragedy still echoes in the mountains where she perished. Nancy Barton was born and raised in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, but went to Jefferson to work on Colonel Joseph Whipple's farm as a maid and cook. Nancy was well loved by her colleagues and neighbors. It was said that one summer Colonel Whipple had been captured by Native American tribesmen, who bound his limbs to prevent his escape. Nancy came to his rescue by offering his captors rum, and when they drank themselves into a stupor, she cut the colonel loose and they returned to the farm. Such a cunning girl had saved every penny she had earned and had collected a decent dowry for herself. And that brings us to Jim Swindle, a handsome farmhand who Nancy was infatuated with from the start. It was a mutual attraction, so when Jim proposed to Nancy, she delightedly accepted. They planned to go to Portsmouth and build a life for themselves where Nancy had grown up. Nancy loved Jim, but what's more is she trusted him, so she gave Jim her entire dowry. And that was not lost on Colonel Whipple. The year was 1778, and America was in the midst of the Revolutionary War, and all the colonies had been called to serve the budding nation in its efforts to achieve liberation. Colonel Whipple was a vocal advocate for the colony's rights, so he contributed who and what he could spare from his farm to the war effort, and that included Jim Swindle. Most versions of the tale paint Colonel Whipple as the devil on Jim's shoulder, whispering in his ear to join the fight and end the colony's subjugation. Jim listened, either out of loyalty to his boss or to his nation, and he left. It was possible that Colonel Whipple sent Jim away so the colonel wouldn't lose a maid as hard-working and beloved as Nancy was. But it's also possible that Jim Swindle never intended to start a family with Nancy. Maybe he got cold feet, and when Colonel Whipple offered him a way out, he took it. Jim spent Nancy's dowry on a uniform, and left while she was on an errand in Lancaster. Maybe Colonel Whipple went with him, maybe not. Either way, he was no help to Nancy when she returned to the colonel's farm. Finding Jim and her savings gone, Nancy asked the neighbors where he could be found. They told her that he had enlisted and was traveling along all 30 miles of Crawford Notch in the White Mountains to go and meet the troops. Resolute, Nancy vowed to go out and bring him home. The neighbors begged her not to go. It was late on a snowy December night, and the cold alone should have been enough to stop her on the doorstep. But she was in love, and she had been cheated. He couldn't have gone far, so she followed Jim into the dark. She hardly brought any supplies with her, for in her mind she would find him and confront him. He would realize his error, and they would return home together. So she went out into the blizzard, in a long dress and boots not made for nature, along the path he surely would have followed. 20 miles in, she was proven right, for she found the smoldering remains of a fire dying in the snow. This redoubled her resolve, and she charged after him, down into the Francosha Notch, and across the partially frozen Saco River. But it was not frozen enough, for her skirts got wet and froze. The heat of young love could not combat the exhaustion and hypothermia that sank into her bones. With Nancy having been gone such a long time, those kindly neighbors bundled themselves against the cold and journeyed out to find her. Dawn broke over the search party, and they found Nancy frozen solid at the riverbank, all alone save the hulking and silent trees that kept their white-crowned vigil over the eternal lover. When Jim heard what had happened to Nancy, guilt robbed him of his sanity, and he suffered a mental break that landed him in an institution, where he would live out the short remainder of his tortured life. Nancy was the second woman to pass through the Crawford Notch, and her legacy is left all over the popular hiking trail. Visitors can stay at the Notchland Inn, where a plaque reads, 1778, Nancy Barton, died in a snowstorm in pursuit of her faithless lover. From there they could go to the Nancy Brook Scenic Area to view the Nancy Brook and the Nancy Cascades, flowing into Nancy Pond with a view of Mount Nancy. But her name is not the only reminder of her resting place. There is a small cairn to mark the spot where she passed, and if you listen, Perhaps you might hear her wretched sobbing, or crazed, delirious laughter. Many hikers have reported hearing such sounds on their hikes, possibly the final words of Nancy Barton to Jim Swindle, lost behind the madness that overcame her. And now for our epilogue. Selina Steffans had always been a beautiful girl. Born in 1896, she grew up in Narragansett, Rhode Island, a bright and happy child who many thought would make a doting wife and mother. Tensions rising overseas put that thought on ice when she was a teenager, and when war broke out in Europe, she paid her own way through Johns Hopkins Nursing School and graduated into a program that placed her in an English hospital. Much like medicine, weaponry had also advanced in the 20th century, and the injuries she saw were gruesome beyond words, but she never wavered in her duty of care. And that's where she met Harold Bell. Harry was brought to the hospital in June of 1819. He'd been injured in the line of duty when a grenade went off close by, its shrapnel forever marking him as a hero and sending him back to the place where he was from. Selina was one of the nurses who took care of him, and he would confide his fears to her. He didn't know if there was a place in this world for him anymore. He couldn't go back to the front, but he couldn't go home either, though he never told her why that was. Regardless, she fell in love with him, and she promised him that he would always have a place where she was. His wounds were largely superficial, so he was released after a couple weeks. Harry came back the next day with a dozen roses and asked Selina to be his girl. The moment the war ended, Harry asked her to marry him. She accepted, and they went home together. Selina's only living relative, her father, had passed away, leaving her his house and a small inheritance. Harry convinced her that his name should be on the deed too, and he should have access to the account, for how else was he going to be able to fix up the house to make way for a family of their own? Selina found that to be prudent, and decided she would have no secrets from the man that she loved, except one. They were happy together in Selina's childhood home, and always on the verge of starting a family. Selina even painted the room that had been her dead brother's a lovely shade of pink, befitting the perfect little nursery. Until one day she woke to the sound of policemen banging on the door. Harry was gone, but Selina thought he must have just gotten an early start that day. And indeed he had, taking her name off of her accounts in the deed, then erasing his name from their marriage certificate. Then he called the police and had her arrested for trespassing. She was jailed, but only for a few months. Her claims that she had a right to the house and that she had been married to Harry were refuted in court, and the judge threatened to send her to an institution if she kept haranguing that poor man. So she served her sentence, and by the time she returned home, the house had been sold to another family, her bank account had been emptied, and Harry was long gone. Selina had nothing left but her looks. Not a penny to her name, not a roof above her head, and not a hospital on the East Coast would employ an unmarried woman with a criminal record. She hitchhiked up to Chicago, where a textiles factory was hiring women to work at the coal-powered mills. The hours were long, the pay was meager, the housing was cramped and filthy. With so many women displaced from their occupations when the war ended, the factory was crowded with women just like her, who had nothing but their wills. In spite of the sickness, the hunger, and the exhaustion, Selina found community with the other girls in the factory. They would trade in handicrafts and stories. They would huddle for warmth on those long winter nights. Selina called them her girls, and they all took care of each other in the forgotten places where life goes by unseen. But, as fortune would have it, the Prohibition settled over America like a cleaver. This coincided with the Roaring Twenties. Music, dance, culture, lifestyles that were stretched to the breaking point by war finally shattered, ushering in the start of a decade of debauchery. Women were participating meaningfully in the workforce and consumer culture, and the 19th Amendment gave some women the ability to vote. And while Selina and her girls couldn't quite afford to keep up with the other women whose doting husbands' wallets were lightened for their fashion, Selina and her girls could make or steal their own flapper dresses. They could cut each other's hair and pass around the same stolen tube of ruby lipstick. Selina was particularly adept at makeovers, hiding years of labor and hardship behind her own special blended tonics and tinctures. Though she trusted her girls with her very life, she wouldn't tell a soul what was in her cosmetics. They guessed there was something salty, but nothing more was ever made clear to them. Once the girls were all dolled up, they could get into any speakeasy in the city. They would dance and smoke and let men buy them drinks, and enjoy the few glorious hours they had to themselves before returning to the factory the next morning. It was the first time since Harry left that Selina felt alive, and she loved being a flapper girl, painting her lips red and her nails redder. Ricky D'Angelo, the owner of her favorite speakeasy, noticed her dancing and invited Selina to work at his club. She accepted, on the condition that her girls were given jobs at the club too. One look at their beautiful faces was all Ricky needed to lift them from poverty and house them uptown. And Selina was given a beautiful private apartment, a closet full of new clothes and a vanity containing every shade of makeup money could buy. This she gave to her girls, for she had her own potions and needed nothing more. Though he loved her in his own way, none of these gifts were actually from Ricky D'Angelo. The bar was his, but it was a front for Vincent Rossi's crime family, where they could store and sell their illegal booze, launder money from their rackets, and hold meetings with rival families. Rossi was a name that carried weight around town, though they were not as flashy as Al Capone or Bugs Moran. They made their fortune in the shadows. They didn't cause trouble when they didn't have to. Don Vincent had seen Selina dancing at Ricky's speakeasy, and he had fallen in love. He had instructed Ricky to hire her, and he was the one who had purchased a new life for her and her girls. And she had no idea. She would pour him his drink every night, and tell him she filled it up a little extra, just for him. Then she would blow him a red-lipped kiss, and he would tip her in $100 bills. One night, one of Rossi's own gangsters went a little too deep in the bottle and tried to pull Selina onto his lap. By simply raising his hand from across the bar, Vincent Rossi had the man removed. Behind all the cases of illegal liquor, there was a stone room that was soundproof from the outside, likely a long-abandoned vault from some other American criminal enterprise. The gangster whimpered and groaned, but before the man could choke out his "I'm sorry," Vincent executed him with his pistol. Someone laughed behind him. Vincent turned and saw Selina in the doorway. He apologized that she had to see such a sight. It wasn't fit for one as lovely as her. But all she did was kiss his cheek and thank him for defending her honor. Vincent asked her out, and she agreed, on the condition that she was not a mistress or an affair, but that she was his partner, his equal. Now it was Vincent's turn to laugh, for in spite of the crime and murder, he was a perfect gentleman, and he made sure Selina got everything she wanted. And people knew who she was, the Don's girl. And when Vincent proposed in the spring of 1924, she wholeheartedly accepted. Beautiful Selina Rossi was loved by the criminal type she drank with as much as she had been by the neighbors she grew up with. Selina made sure to have a drink with her girls every night, and to tip heavy and often for work well done. Hers was the name on everyone's lips, but it was not always praises from her admirers. Some gave weight to the name Rossi, noticing that Vincent wasn't always around when business needed to be taken care of. He had family abroad and brothers on the West Coast, and when Selina wasn't with him, business was still taken care of, and Ricky would have another body in the vault to dispose of at dawn. Ricky was also keenly aware that if ever one of the girls came into the club saying that her boyfriend or husband had laid a hand on her, those men wouldn't come calling anymore. Selina became known as the Red Queen on the streets, a name whispered in back-alley pool halls and morning-after jail cells, with the same reverence given to the boogeyman or the Grim Reaper. But Selina was notoriously polite, freely giving anyone her red-lipped smile. And as long as they were polite too, there wouldn't be any problems to take care of. There was one evening when a particular problem presented itself while Vincent was in Los Angeles. It was business as usual at Ricky's joint. Selina was having a drink when she was tapped on the shoulder and told someone was waiting for her in the vault. A criminal who they'd employed on a temporary basis had attempted to rob them. This man had worked with them before, but it seemed tonight that instead of loading the cases of fine Irish whiskey onto the truck headed for Ricky's speakeasy, he'd loaded them into his own car, then had attempted to flee the city. He barely made it 6 blocks before Rossi's men shot out his tires and brought him to the Red Queen. Selina finished her Bloody Mary and went down to the vault. When she saw the criminal, she burst out laughing. She recognized those scars anywhere. Bloody, bruised, cut, and bound in front of her was Harold Bell. Gone was the rugged English soldier she'd brought home from the war. This man had suffered grievously at the hands of time. When she'd finished laughing, she removed the gag and gave him one chance to explain himself. He started to beg, but she didn't want that from him. She knew his fears, she remembered them well. He'd been frightened that he didn't belong anywhere, So she'd built a place for him to belong, and he abandoned her outside of it. Now was his turn to lay siege on her better nature, to search wildly for that sweet-as-could-be nurse who cared for him nearly a decade ago. Harry told her his story, that he sold her father's house and went to make a name for himself with Selina's money. He went to New York City, where he eloped with an heiress from Long Island. But her parents refused to sponsor a marriage they didn't approve of, and Selina's money had run out, but not before Harry had a baby with his adoring wife, and a gambling addiction he could satisfactorily hide. That is, until he couldn't. He started borrowing from loan sharks, who found him and threatened his family. So Harry did what any responsible father would do, and robbed his in-laws. They brought their daughter and their grandchild home, then reported Harry to the police. He fled New York and made his living in petty larceny, Philadelphia, until the loan shark caught wind of him, and Harry ran all the way up to Chicago, where he could skate by on scraps of mafia criminality. But greed was in his nature, and he figured he could steal from Rossi and sell the liquor somewhere in the Midwest. We could marry another wealthy woman and start all over again. There was silence for a sickly long while. No one knows precisely what happened next, but when Ricky came down to the vault at dawn, Harry was gone. Ricky asked Selina what had happened to Harry. Selina told him not to worry about it. She had taken care of it, right down to the blood stains on the stones. Blood and its removal were not uncommon knowledge for a nurse, however out of practice, to have. But she'd read beyond her textbooks and was of the opinion that blood was the most important resource on planet Earth. Now, blood in our minds is associated with gore and violence, but in the ancient world, blood was life. Specifically, it was believed in certain cultures, like ancient Greece, that a person's life force was housed in their blood. Similarly, in Egyptian mythos, a dead person's heart was weighed after they'd confessed their sins to the god of death, Osiris. Their hearts would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at, also known as the feather of truth. If the heart was lighter, the soul would spend eternity in paradise, called the Field of Reeds. If it was not, they would be devoured by the god Ammit. Similarly, bloodletting in medicine was a practice brought about by humorism, an early idea that the body was a vessel that housed 4 liquids, black bile, yellow bile, lymph, and blood, called humors. And if the humors were out of balance, disease would creep in. The way to return a person's humors to equilibrium was through bloodletting, which actually deprives the human body of white blood cells and makes the sick even sicker. But they didn't know that then. Fortunately, by the time Selina Steffans was at Johns Hopkins University, that was well known to be old superstition, to be laughed at as folly of the ancient world. But that was not Selina's world, a modern woman roaring through the 20s. When Vincent got home that evening, he met Selina at Ricky's speakeasy for a drink, and Selina told him what had happened, how she'd found the man who cheated her when she was young, and that he was never coming back. Vincent thought revenge agreed with her, for she looked even more radiant than she usually did. So he kissed her red lips, and found them to be slightly saltier than usual. When he told Selina, she just fussed over his health, claiming that could be a sign of some kind of brain malaise or internal wound. But Vincent quieted her worries and finished his drink. By the end of the cocktail, he noticed just how red the other girl's lips were. The sight of it sent a shiver down his spine. Had they always been that vibrant? When Selina put a hand on his arm to comfort him, suddenly he noticed that her nails were a particularly bright shade of red. Vincent took his leave for the night and called on Ricky to walk him home. Vincent asked Ricky if he'd seen the body of the man who cheated Selina, and if he had any idea what she had done to him. Ricky told him that he hadn't seen Harold Bell, but he'd also never seen some of the other men claimed by the Red Queen. Some people went into the vault and never came out again. And each time Ricky waited for Selina to deliver him a body, none would come. Ricky wouldn't dare ask Vincent about it. Vincent was very protective of his beautiful wife. And he was right. Vincent threatened Ricky within an inch of his life if he dared to speak a word of this to another living soul, and went home. He went to Selina's vanity and rolled out her lipstick. It was dripping red, and when he put it to his lips, he knew it had been dipped in blood. Then he opened her perfume bottle and found more of the same. And he found it in her nail varnish and in the powder she would use for her cheeks and collarbones. Then he heard the door open, and it was too late for him to escape. She stood in the doorway, smiling brilliantly at him. He asked her why, And because she loved him, she told him, she used the blood to give her beauty. She always had, and it had always worked. She'd had a brother once, but she used him all up and gave him to the sea. Vincent asked her if he was next, and she said that depends. They had a nice little arrangement going. He kept her beautiful, and she kept his rivals in line. Their life was good. Why change it now? Why should she be all alone again? Vincent was a true gentleman. He'd vowed to love her forever, and that's precisely what he intended to do. So they kept their arrangement. Only some of the criminals were not made examples of. They were made cosmetics. They were happy, so happy, until there were almost no bodies for Ricky to dispose of. And you noticed that Vincent looked different too. Younger, stronger, beautiful in the same cold way that Selina and her girls were. There was one early morning where Ricky couldn't take the horrors his imagination conjured, so he went to the police station and told them everything he knew. That was all the police needed to raid their home and Ricky's speakeasy. Selina and Vincent were arrested. Vincent had connections with the legal system, but only enough to save himself. Selina was put to death. Years later, Vincent got out of prison. He avoided the Second World War and the downfall of Chicago crime. He followed his family out west and stayed there to live out the rest of his days. Journalists still followed him around, reporters looking for scraps of old crime to spark their fledgling careers. But they found he had long since left that life behind him. He just mowed his lawn, scooped his pool, and had Bloody Marys with a young woman who couldn't have been more than 25. With the advent of color photography, those voyeurs were able to capture images of the old mobster and his young wife with the ruby red lips. And though the old newspaper articles never showed the color of the Red Queen's lips, her face was unchanged, after all those years and a death sentence later. How do I know? She told me, of course. Mrs. Rossi loves telling stories, and she used to give all the neighborhood kids lemonade on hot summer days. And when our mothers would ask her how she got her lips so red and her hair so shiny, she'd tell them this story. And they'd never believe it, even though when there was trouble in the neighborhood, it never lasted long. Mrs. Rossi always took care of it. That's the end of today's tale. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I've enjoyed telling it. Please remember to like, share, and tell all your friends. Join me next time for more fabricated folktales on Epilogue.